Hello viewers, today we will be going over Magnus' 10th game of chess ever. In this match Magnus is rated 2064 while Magnus' opponent is a 2154 rated player by the name of Holger Bartels. We start off with both sides playing the king's pawn opening, which eventually develops into the Italian game. Magnus plays the very common move of knight f6. White responds with the fried liver attack, and Magnus plays another very common move in this position, which is queen's pawn to d5. White continues with the fried liver attack, but here Magnus moves his knight to a5, diverging from the fried liver attack while attacking white's bishop. In retaliation, white moves their pawn to b5 check. Magnus defends with pawn to c6. White takes, black takes, threatening the bishop while being defended by the knight. The bishop retreats to e2. Magnus kicks the knight and advances with his bishop to c5. Now just looking at this position you can tell that while having more material, black is more developed, with 3 pieces out and about with multiple more possibilities, while white's pieces have been kicked back to their side and the rest of the pieces are locked in. Continuing with the game, white castles, black takes the h3 horse, causing white to open up the g file and exposing the king up. Magnus moves his knight to the center of the board, which seems like a dumb move. White can kick it off with 3 pieces, but Magnus' intention was never to attack anything with the knight in this position. White kicks the knight as predicted. Now Magnus moves his knight to g5, attacking a pawn and threatening check. Holger moves his bishop to e3, attacking Magnus' black squared bishop in case he tries to check with the knight, but Magnus takes anyways. And Holger counters with his king, attacking Magnus' horse and bishop at the same time. But Magnus moves his knight to f4 check, and as the engine says, this is a mistake. Now for white's move, the logical thing to do here would be to take with the bishop. But I guess white was hoping Magnus would trade bishops and open his rook, so he doesn't do it. White moves to h1. Now, Magnus moves his knight to b7, protecting his bishop. Holger moves his bishop to f3, attacking the c6 pawn. Magnus defends with queen to b6, defending the pawn and attacking the b2 pawn. White notices this and opens up their rook with horse to d2, intending to fork his queen and pawn and take massive room, while providing backup to his other pieces. Magnus castles, not worrying about the horse, and Holger forks as intended. Magnus defends with queen to c7 and Holger moves queen to d2. Giving support to this e3 bishop, Magnus trades, allowing Holger to open up his rook while attacking black's knight. Magnus retreats to d5, Holger puts pressure on the pawn knight with queen to g2. Magnus alleviates that pressure with queen's rook to d8. Then, Holger puts pressure on the e5 pawn with queen to g3. Magnus defends with the same rook, then Holger moves his bishop to e4, finally opening up the f column for his rook. However, it doesn't do much. However, Magnus offers a trade with knight to b6. Holger then does a great move with rook to g1, threatening checkmate. Magnus brutally rejects white's attempts with pawn to g5. Then Holger accepts his offer and trades knights, then moves his other rook to f1. Magnus does a really bad move according to the engine, and that's because of the possibility of bishop to f5. Basically inviting a loss of material. Now I don't know if you have noticed yet or not, but Holger has been absolutely jackhammering Magnus this entire game from this move, and now Holger is plus 2.4. Holger ignores the fact that he could have won this match and moves queen to f3. Which is totally random and doesn't do a lot, causing him to lose 0.8 points. Then Magnus does a great move and moves knight to e7. However, continuing with his randomness, Holger offers a trading of queens, which leaves him with 0.2 points. Magnus accepts and then does a second great move, king to g7, threatening white's rook. Holger does his second great move with rook to f1. Magnus then moves his rook into the battlefield while protecting a pawn with rook c8. Holger moves his pawn to c3 and Magnus moves his horse to the battlefield, threatening his rook and e3 pawn. Holger trades with his bishop, which causes the c-file to be opened, allowing Magnus a free ticket to a pawn buffet. Holger moves his rook to a6 threatening black's pawn, and Magnus attempts to get into the pawn buffet with rook to b8, however Magnus is rejected with pawn to b3. Magnus then attempts to get in again with rook back to c8. Holger moves pawn to c4, then black takes, white takes, and Magnus protects his a7 pawn. Then Holger attempts a mate in 3 with rook to f6. Magnus opens up his king's path with rook to d8 threatening the 2-file as well as check. Holger, giving up on the mate in 3, offers a trade of rooks which Magnus is forced to accept. A few pawns move and Magnus does another blunder according to the engine, and so does Holger. Then Magnus does a great move with pawn to f4, Holger does another blunder, then another great move with pawn to f3 check. Holger gets in the way of the pawn, but that was nothing more than a mistake. Magnus moves rook to d2, now the engine says it's a mistake, but this is a magnificent move because if white moves to g3, rook moves to g2 and white's king is forced to get away from the pawn which promotes, and black has basically won at this point. So the other 3 moves lead to the same thing, which is a draw. Look, if white moves anywhere out of these 4 blocks, black gets to promote a pawn, which is basically game over for white. Understanding this, Magnus and Holger's game ended in a draw by repetition.